Namaste everyone, my name is Davina and I'll be hosting today's In Conversation With. This month's topic is how can the climate debate be more inclusive of all voices? So using our In Conversation platform, we will be highlighting some of the work of climate activists, organisations and sampradaya here in the UK. We hope that through showcasing these community members, more and more people will feel inspired to join the fight for climate change. We want to create a conversation and dialogue about the climate crisis with our community. So today, I'm joined by Sanjana. So thank you for joining. Sanjana is a second-year English Lit undergraduate student, an aspiring journalist who enjoys writing about social and environmental issues. She works with Greens of Colour on the social media team. Sanjana is also the youth lead with her local temple and endeavours to emphasise social and environmental justice within Dharmic teachings when leading youth sessions. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the first thing I kind of wanted to talk about is like the work you do with Greens of Colour. So what are the main aims of Greens of Colour?
Yeah, sure. So the Greens of Colour is basically a branch group within the Green Party. So the first sort of aim is to help make the Green Party itself more inclusive for people of colour, to kind of raise awareness about the issues facing BAME and people of colour in the Green Party, but also kind of beyond in society as a whole, in politics, the kind of political issues they're facing and the intersections between racial justice and environmental justice. So Greens of Colour, as well as doing certain things within the Green Party, which are more sort of known within there, they do their own campaigns outside of that, sort of working with other groups within the climate movement and also pressuring the government to do certain things where we know those are going to particularly affect people of colour within the community. We'll probably touch a bit on that later on, but yeah, a few campaigns like that.
Brilliant. And you just briefly mentioned it, but you mentioned BAME. And I just wanted to ask, like, for people who don't know, like, what is BAME? What does it stand for? And also, how is having a separate group for BME members useful?
Sure, yeah. So BME or BAME is like Black and minority ethnic. So that's basically anyone who falls within that umbrella. And it's just a way of sort of understanding that minority communities in the UK are certainly disproportionately affected by a number of issues, both in terms of like class, climate, race, etc. And I think there's a lot of talk about that acronym at the moment. Actually, I'm not really sure if the government's going to keep on using it. It's really difficult to know how best to use that term, and no term is ever going to be sort of fully encompassing, but it's a helpful one at the moment. And I think having a separate group for BME members is really useful because it provides a safe space. I think at the moment, a lot of people feel like the climate movement is for a particular type of person, like someone who's vegan, sort of middle class, maybe white. And so when people are coming into the Green Party, it allows people of color to think, okay, they are people like me there, and they can connect with them and feel like there's a safe space to talk about their issues as well. And then also we can push for when the Green Party might be overlooking something that affects us or not thinking about the intersections, we can kind of campaign for that as well and make sure that the Green movement is becoming more inclusive, definitely in the political sphere.
Yeah, so in a sense, you're kind of acting as a line of like a barrier, for the Green Party to kind of give them advice and also encourage that inclusivity, which is kind of what we need in this generation. And I really like that. And obviously we just talked about being more inclusive and, can you give your thoughts on how can we as society, how can the climate issue be more inclusive and listen to all voices?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and a really big question as well. And I think, events like these, especially spotlighting sort of different climate activists, especially climate activists of color, is really, really useful. But also recognizing that there's not only one approach. So when a lot of people think about climate change, they think about like the big science behind it. And not only does that gatekeep maybe certain communities of color, but it gatekeeps from people who just, maybe don't know STEM as much or haven't had that education. And they think, oh, there's all these big terms, there's all this scientific things going on, all of these reviews, all of these panels. And then you think, how do I even start to make a difference? So I think it's about spotlighting the small actions. I think it's about approaching it from different avenues, whether that be religion, whether that be looking at local communities and just how it affects it on a smaller scale. But yeah, just recognizing that there are multiple ways to bring the climate crisis and climate movement to different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and talking about like spotlighting individuals, and I know we mentioned it in your bio as well, you know, you've been working with like local temples, and kind of what's that been like for you? What have you done with local temples? And I'll get onto it in a little bit actually in the next questions, but kind of how have you found your experiences with that?
Yeah, definitely. So basically, I guess it kind of came about by accident that I work with my local temple at the moment because I started attending these Bhagavad Gita classes.
Mhm.
And then following that, I kind of picked up the knowledge quite well. And I guess because I do English, but I have really no idea. One of the leads there thought, hey, you explain it in quite a simple way. Let's start these Bhagavad Gita classes. And I think that's the main work that I do at the moment. I work with kids and I teach them the Bhagavad Gita and I teach them the main principles in a sort of lesson-based way.
Yeah.
And when I was going through the text, I was thinking so much of this linked to sort of social justice, environmental justice, like this idea that we're all connected, we're all souls, this idea that we're supposed to be taking care of the environment around us because it ultimately belongs to sort of God. And also the very regulations that are put in there. So can be vegetarian, look after others, etc., etc. So I started framing my lessons around those and linking them to sort of the climate movement that's really current. And I think really current for a lot of young people because they recognize that it is their future. And the other upcoming exciting thing that we're going to be doing is this kids cookbook within my temple. So we want to try and pass it around to when they visit schools. And mainly it's just going to be vegan and vegetarian recipes. But at the beginning, there's going to be a sort of outline of the philosophy. And that's going to intersect this idea of the compassionate arguments of, you know, how it's affecting the climate, how it's affecting the animals involved, and also the philosophy. So what kind of Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita about being vegetarian and why that links to that philosophy. So there again, it's kind of linking back to being more inclusive. It's providing a different route for those kids to understand why should I kind of follow this idea of taking care of the planet more.
Yeah, and it's really come at in a very organic way, as you said. You know, you didn't go in with the intention of really kind of pushing environmental change, but actually what you found is there were so many similarities within what we as Hindus believe and what we can apply to real current world, and I think that's really great. So obviously, you know, as an organization, Hindu Climate Action, there are a lot of ties between Hinduism and the environment, but can the method that you're using be used by other faiths, or is
Yeah,
it just a Hindu preaching?
I think that's a really good question. And I think, you know, like you said, in terms of Hinduism, I think, you know, a lot of people know that Hinduism is involved with like a no beef diet, or like they clearly kind of say vegetarianism. Perhaps that might not be the case in other scriptures. But at the same time, I think it is all about this idea of like compassion, about this idea of connection between others, and the fact that this world is ours to take care of, to kind of have stewardship over. I believe that's a Christian concept. Um, and the other thing is, when I'd actually been working with a few people, they say, okay, like it doesn't necessarily say anywhere else in other scriptures that you shouldn't eat meat, but then it also says things like thou shalt not kill. So it's how you interpret that as well, and how you can maybe link that to some of the climate issues we're experiencing now.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It's all about kind of application in a way, isn't it? And
Yeah.
interpretation. Yeah, 100%. And how have you found kind of working with, going back to the Hindu aspect, working with mandirs and young children? Have you found that there's been a lot of pushback in the community, or have you found that people are really, really inspired and encouraged and do want to learn more about like environmental issues?
I think I've been sort of very lucky in my temple in terms of the fact that like they're really looking towards the youth voices now,
Mm.
which is actually, I think, in a way quite rare, because I think when I was younger, you'd associate going to the temple and you think, okay, there's these people who've always been doing it and they've always been doing it in this way, and this is how they're going to frame it. And I found it really inaccessible. It was like, I didn't really know what I was saying when I did the prayers. I didn't really know what I was believing in. And the temple that I'm working with now, it's brilliant because they're saying we want to run more youth sessions, we want to set up a youth committee, we want to do stuff that you guys are passionate about. And so we've been thinking, okay, post-COVID, how can we scale up sort of our homelessness initiatives, or how can we scale up this and that within young people, because they're saying at the end of the day, in 20-30 years, this is going to be yours. So you need to find a way to connect with it. And I think the environment is one of the big ways that people can connect with it, because it's one of the most topical issues going on right now.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, you said it is quite rare, and I do agree with you that, you know, sometimes you walk into the Mondays and it's always, obviously the elders with the most wisdom, they come in and they have their say. And as a young person, you wait until you're at that stage when you can then have that influence. But what do you think it was like for your Monday that switched it? Why were they suddenly really advocating for youth activism?
I think it was really that we were doing these classes and a lot of young people were joining, even kids younger than me. They're like 10 to 13, and they were asking questions. They were coming up and they said, you know, any questions, and they were asking these really deep questions. And it was suddenly like, you know, these kids they've got a point, and they're ready to learn, they're ready to do things, they're ready to sort of question and not just accept things. And I think they realized that there was some real potential there, that they were driven. And why would you want to waste it and kind of push it away?
Yeah, 100%. And so now that we've kind of spoken a bit about like the temple work, I'd like to bring it back just to the other work you're doing with the Green Party, Greens of Colour. So would it be okay for you to just quickly explain to people who now understand a bit more about the group, what kind of work you're actually doing within the community?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that Greens of Colour does is they offer some online training to a couple of local communities. They might work with councils, or they might work with local activist groups, or maybe local sort of church groups, any sort of community like Rotary Club, etc. And they will offer them training on how they can make sure they're being more inclusive of people of colour, how they're making sure their decisions take those things into account. So especially with councils, I guess, with schooling, with what kind of infrastructure they're building, etc. And just offer training to make those spaces safer and more inclusive. So that's one thing that they do. They also do a number of campaigns. The most prominent at the moment is the 5 demands for racial justice, which of course has sprung from a few of the events over the last years. Those 5 demands are decolonize the curriculum, so allowing people to learn more about the colonies and how, you know, the British Empire, the impact of that, but also the cultures of the colonies, which I think is important from an environmental sense. As we said, Hindu Dharma encompasses so much of the environmental message. Indigenous practices do as well. So learning more about those cultures actually allows for us to, again, learn those different avenues to climate justice. The other ones are sort of scrapping the NHS surcharge. So I think that's for immigrants who are coming over to work. They have to pay that extra surcharge for the NHS. So obviously that disproportionately affects people of colour. Ending indefinite detention. They've also called for an inquiry into the BAME COVID deaths. Again, obviously very recent, given the kind of disproportionate deaths and illnesses we've seen there. And then also about taking racist abuse out of politics, which is another space that isn't always safe for people of colour. It's both, you know, I think we've seen in the Labour Party and the Conservative Party alike, and probably in the Green Party too. So they kind of act, again, like as that buffer to make sure people are considering that.
And I like how like Greens of Colour is obviously an environmental organization, and they work closely with trying to reduce climate change, but they also do include other issues, like other big social issues, like you said, with the COVID deaths and how they affect our community. And so what's it like working for an organization that kind of has all these different elements, and it's probably quite wholesome, you know, it's probably really encouraging when you see these progress being made within our community.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, people always talk about representation, and I think it really is important when you're working in an organization and you see other people like you, other people within your communities working on these social justice issues, working within politics, working to make all these changes. You think, I can do it too. Whereas maybe if you didn't see that, you think, oh, well, the only people that I see are not like me. They're not in my community. So how can I make a difference? And I think that's really important as well. I mean, I think at times, obviously all these social issues can be really overwhelming. So it's nice to have an organization and a community who can recognize and support you when you're not feeling up to doing all that work as well. It's not all about campaigning, it's also about finding a place to land, and people who will resonate with your experiences.
Yeah, 100%. And briefly touching on what you said about the importance of like representation, obviously it's a very important issue that we're both affected by. And is that why then you joined Greens of Colour, or was there what inspired you to start doing this work?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, one of my friends was already part of the Greens of Colour committee. So when I joined the Green Party, it seemed like an obvious place to go because I kind of already knew a little bit about the work that they're doing. But I think it also just inspired me to, find like-minded people, to know that I was making a difference in sort of an intersectional way. And then also, one of the really good things about these liberation groups within the Green Party, like Greens of Colour, is that you get to upskill yourself. So as you mentioned at the beginning, I'm part of the social media team. So I've learned so much. They offered me training of how I can do that. I understand the tone of the Green Party. It felt as well like, I could help out with the campaigns in the recent council elections or the mayoral elections. So you really do feel like you're making a difference, whether you're on committee or whether you've been there for 5 years or whether you've been there for half a year. You just feel really involved.
Yeah, yeah. And so you've mentioned like some of the amazing things that Greens of Colour do and why you got involved. So for people watching, how can they get involved if they want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we have is a few things. Well, apart from just following us on our socials, supporting our campaigns and signing our petitions, I don't know if I can drop the link to like our website.
Yeah, we can put in the link afterwards.
We can definitely do that. And then also another really good thing we have, which is probably also on our website, is this Greens of Colour Liberation list. So this is a list of books that you can use to educate yourself on racial justice, on environmental justice, just books that we recommended and we found really useful. And then also part of that money gets donated to Greens of Colour, so it will be supporting our work, which will obviously be really useful.
Brilliant. And what is your favourite book from that list?
God, I had to think about that list now. I need to get it up.
What is your favourite climate change book? Putting you on the spot here, just intrigued.
I don't have a favorite climate change book yet, but I have one that I'm really excited that's coming up. So I don't know if anyone knows the climate change activist Aja Barber. She looks a lot at like fashion, fast fashion, consumption, and how consumer culture is like contributing to the climate crisis, and then all intersecting it back to colonialism. And there's a book coming out, it's called like Consumed, it's talking about consumerism and colonialism. So I'd recommend getting that because I follow a lot of her work. I follow them on Patreon and it's just brilliant, everything I read. So I'm so excited for that book.
Amazing. I'll definitely add that to my list. So yeah, brilliant. I think that kind of comes to the end of like the questions that I have for you. So I think we've got a couple of questions in the chat that have popped up. So I'm going to head to the first one. So are the principles of Greens of Colour different to the main Green Party?
That's a good question. I think, I think we share a lot of principles with the Green Party because within Green Party policy, they try and advocate for migrant rights, advocate for intersectionality. A lot of the policies that they have are geared towards making sure that people are not disproportionately affected by race, class, etc. At the same time, because because people of color within the Green Party are a small minority, I think sometimes we have to push a little bit further in terms of being like, you can't just put all the burden on us to educate you or to put something out quickly to make it look like we're really intersectional on our account. And then, so, we're sort of separate, we hold them to account, but our principles are ultimately the same. And the reason why we are a branch is because the Green Party want to do better. And they know by having a kind of branch there who is watching, we can sort of rectify or push back when we need to.
Yeah, and I think it is so important, like especially in politics now, we've seen like the importance of accountability, and it's really good that the Green Party have taken it on board and a group has come out of the Green Party to ensure that there is representation within this field. So I really like that about this group. So next question is, where do you see yourself in the future with the Green Party or Greens of Colour?
Um, Another very good question that I haven't really thought about, so I'm glad that you've asked me. I mean, I'd love to stick with Greens of Colour, and maybe more when I have more capacity to join their committee as well. Like, you know, doing either external relations, like my friend Ria is, or anything else where I could be of use. So just sort of helping them out with their campaigns and continuing maybe on a larger scale once I finish university and maybe have more time for like going out campaigning. And another thing is that I joined Greens of Colour during COVID. So I'm really excited to be doing some in-person trainings and actually going out and meeting communities as well. I think that's a big part of Greens of Colour that I haven't been able to experience as much yet.
Yeah, 100%. Brilliant. So I think that was all of our questions for today. So just a couple of things before we wrap up. For all the viewers there, we'll be posting this on YouTube early next week. So if you want to go back and rewatch it, or there's parts that you want to see again, then it'll be on our YouTube. And if anyone has any questions, please do throw them into the comments of the live video now, and we can answer them after the talk with Sanjana. So with that, I'd like to say the biggest thank you for Sanjana for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I think you're really, really inspiring the work that you're doing. And it is really, really nice to speak to someone who is so passionate about representation within our community with regards to the environmental sphere. So thank you again for joining, and thank you for watching to the viewers.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who was watching. I hope that I was able to provide some interesting food for thought.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you.